we present June Whitfield as Miss Marple in Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors.
Do you think that people would ever guess, Jane, that you and I are practically the same age?
Oh, not for one moment, Ruth, I'm afraid. I look every minute of mine.
And so do I, though not quite in the same way.
Ruth Van Rydock was standing in front of a long mirror in her apartment at Claridge's, trying on a very elegant and quite remarkably expensive dress.
I know that what I see in my mirror is not really true. Mirrors only show you what you expect to see.
Ruth, you surely can't have asked me to come all the way up from St. Mary Mead to tell me that.
No, Jane. I most certainly have not. I want to talk about Carrie Louise. I'm worried about her.
Carrie Louise. The name took me back more than half a century to the pensionat in Florence, where I first met the two Martin sisters. I was a pink and white English girl from a cathedral close, filled with excitement by the two American girls with their vitality and their curious ways of speech. Ruth, tall, eager, totally confident. Carrie Louise, small, dainty, and rather wistful.
When did you see her last, Jane?
Oh, not for a long time. It must be 25 years at least. We still exchange Christmas cards, of course. But why are you worried about her, Ruth? What is it?
Well, in a way, that's what worries me most. I just don't know.
She's not ill.
She's very delicate, always has been. But I wouldn't say she's any worse than usual, considering she's getting on in years. Just as we all are.
Is she unhappy?
Oh, no. Carrie Louise has always lived right out of this world. She has no idea what it's really like. Maybe that's what's worrying me.
She was always the one who had ideals. Although ideals were rather the fashion when we were young. I was going off to nurse lepers, and you wanted to be a nun, I remember.
Well, that was one ideal that certainly didn't materialize. Still, taken by and large, I hadn't done too badly out of marriage.
3 times, unless I've lost count. And they were all extraordinarily wealthy men.
While poor Carrie Louise has always married cranks. She was a pushover for anything or anyone really unworldly. I remember when she was just 17, pretty as they make them, listening with her eyes as big as saucers to old Eric Gulbranson, holding forth about his plans for the human race. Over 50, and she married him, a widower with a family of grown-up children, and all because of his philanthropic ideals.
I suppose that when you've amassed a colossal fortune like his, philanthropy is the only way to dispose of it. All those trusts and research fellowships and colleges for the sons of working men.
Even so, she became a very wealthy woman when he died. 32's a very nice age for a widow. She's got experience, but she's still adaptable. And with a small fortune into the bargain, that's why Johnny Restorick married her, of course.
He was something to do with the theatre, was he not? A designer or something of the sort?
Oh, I never took any of that very seriously. Johnny was a selfish, pleasure-loving, lazy hound. But that's so much safer than a crank.
And then he left her for some Yugoslav woman whose name I could never pronounce.
And poor dear Carrie Louise was quite angelically sweet about it all, obligingly prepared to divorce him so that he and that frightful woman could get married.
But weren't there 2 children from his previous marriage, or have I got it totally confused?
Oh, no, you're quite right. She even took them under her wing, reckoned they'd be more settled living with her. Just as well, for within 6 months both Johnny and his unpronounceable new wife were dead. She drove their car over a cliff in a fit of rage. Oh, they said it was an accident, but I always thought it was sheer bad temper.
I've never met her third husband, Louis Sericold, nor do I know anything about him.
Oh, Louis is yet another crank, another man with ideals wanting to improve everyone's lives for them. Rescuing juvenile criminals is his passion, and he turned Carrie Louise's house Stony Gates into a college for young offenders funded by the Gulbranson Trust.
Ruth, what exactly is it that you're afraid of?
I tell you, I don't know, Jane. I've just been down there on a flying visit, and there's something wrong in the atmosphere of that place, something lurking there that's evil. I want you to go down there, Jane, and find out exactly what it is.
But surely that would be a most difficult thing to bring about.
Oh, no, it wouldn't. I've worked it all out. I prepared the ground already.
In what way?
You'll admit, I'm sure, that things have been difficult in this country since the war for people like yourself, living on a small fixed income.
Oh, yes.
I suggested that what you really needed was a nice long rest in lovely surroundings with an old friend and plenty of nourishing food and no cares or worries. Anyway, it's all organized. She's going to send you an invitation. Now, go on, be mad if you want to be.
Why should I be mad at you, Ruth? It's a very ingenious and plausible approach, and Carrie Louise is hardly likely to invite me for an indefinite stay. 3 weeks should be ample.
You reckon you can find out what's wrong there in 3 weeks? You've got a lot of confidence in yourself, Jane.
But I was feeling far from confident 2 weeks later on the train to Market Kindle, the nearest station to Stonygate. I was grateful for the fact that there were a great many stops, so that I had time to try and work out what Ruth had told me about Carrie Louise's large and complicated family. There had been no children at first from her marriage to Eric Gulbranson.
Poor Carrie Louise. She took that very much to heart.
So they decided to adopt a little girl. Pippa, they called her.
A perfectly lovely little creature. She was 2 years old when they got her.
And then, as so often happens, Carrie Louise discovered that she was pregnant. She had a daughter, Mildred, whom I met once or twice. She used to call me Aunt Jane.
She was very plain and terribly jealous of any attention shown to Pippa.
And Pippa married an Italian.
The Marchese di San Severiano.
But she died giving birth to a little girl, Gina, who was brought up by Carrie Louise and who is living at Stoneygates with her American husband.
And Mildred married a clergyman at Cannon Street, much older than she was and given to colds in the head. He died a year ago and Mildred came back to live with her mother.
And then there are Johnny Restorick's children by his first wife, and they are called...
Alexis and Stephen. They're absolutely devoted to Carrie Louise.
And apart from Carrie Louise's husband, Louis Sericold, and dozens of teachers and psychiatrists, that is it, I think. But which of them, I wonder, will be there to meet me at the station?
Miss Marple, you are Miss Marple.
Yes, I am Miss Marple.
I've come to meet you from Stoneygates.
How very kind.
And your luggage.
Just this suitcase.
Porter, bring this case over to the car, will you?
Righto. Shan't be long.
These people get more unhelpful every day. The car's just over here. I'm Edgar Lawson. Mrs. Sericold asked me to meet you. I helped Mr. Sericold in his work.
Oh.
Will you come in front with me, Miss Marple, or would you prefer to go in the back?
Oh, thank you. I think
Edgar?
What the devil?
I thought I wasn't going to make it in time. I see you've got Miss Marple. I've come to meet her. How do you do, Miss Marple?
How do you do?
I'm Gina, Mrs. Sericold's granddaughter. What a nice string bag. I love string bags. I'll take that in your coat while you get in.
But look here, Gina. I came to meet Miss Marple. It was all arranged.
Oh, I know, Edgar, but I suddenly thought it'd be nice if I came along. I'll take Miss Marple with me, and you can follow on with the luggage.
Do you know, my dear, I don't think Mr. Lawson was very pleased.
Edgar's just a pompous idiot, always trying to give the impression that he matters.
And doesn't he?
Good Lord, no. He's only been with us a short while. He's off his chump, anyway. You were at school with Grandam, weren't you? It seems so queer. It must have been a very long time ago.
Oh, yes, indeed it was. I expect you feel that more with me than you do with your grandmother.
Yes, that's true. Grandam, you know, gives one a curiously ageless feeling.
It's so many years since I last saw her. I wonder if I shall find her much changed.
Her hair's grey, of course, and she walks with a stick because of her arthritis. It's been getting much worse lately.
Oh, dear.
Have you been to Stonygates before?
No, I've heard a great deal about it, of course.
It's pretty ghastly, really. A great Gothic monstrosity. What Steve calls best Victorian lavatory period. But it can be fun, too. Some of the boys are rather pets in their way.
That young man at the station, Mr. Lawson, he helps Mr. Sericold, he tells me. Is he his secretary?
Good Lord, no. He hasn't brains enough for that. He's a case, really. He used to stay at hotels and pretend he was a VC or a fighter pilot and borrow money and do a flit. But Lewis took him in and found him jobs to do. I dare say we shall wake up and find ourselves murdered one of these days. Well, there it is in all its glory. Hideous, isn't it? There's Grandam over there on the terrace. I'll drop you off here so you can go meet her.
Jane! Oh, how wonderful to see you again after all these years.
Dear Carrie Louise.
Oh, I blame myself for letting it be so long. Years since I last saw you. Oh, it's just lovely that you've come at last to pay us a visit here.
Don't stay out too long, Grandam. It's getting cold.
They all fuss about me so. They rub it in that I'm an old woman.
And you don't feel like one.
No, Jane, I don't. In spite of all my various aches and pains, inside myself, I go on feeling just like a chit of a girl like Gina. Perhaps everyone does. The glass shows them how old they are, and they just refuse to believe it. It seems such a little while ago that we were girls at that boarding school on the Lungano.
Yes.
Do you remember Fräulein Schmidt?
Oh, with those frightful button-up boots. How could I ever forget her?
We'd better be going into the house, or I shall get the most dreadful scolding from Jolly.
Jolly?
Juliet Belliver. You'll see I shall get a terrible ticking off.
What on earth are you thinking of, Cara, staying out in that cold breeze? What will Mr. Sericold say?
Do stop fussing, Julie. I want you to meet a very old friend of mine, Jane Marple. Jane, this is Miss Belliver, who is simply everything to me. Nurse, dragon, watchdog, secretary, housekeeper, and very faithful friend.
And much good does it do me, since you never listen to a word I say. How do you do, Miss Marple?
How do you do?
Where are we putting Miss Marple, Jolly?
In the blue room. Shall I take her up?
Oh, if you be so kind.
Not that the brocade looks very blue any longer. It's faded, like everything else in this house. Nothing's changed here in 50 years, except your bathroom. It's quite dazzling, isn't it?
Oh,
All that chromium, and the orchid tiles.
it's very modern.
John Restorick had 10 bathrooms put into the place when he married Carrie. The plumbing is about the only thing in Stonygates that's ever been modernised. He said that the house was a perfect period piece and should be left exactly as it was. Did you know him at all?
No, I never met him. Mrs. Sericold and I have seen practically nothing of one another over the years.
He had great charm, rather like his sons. Women liked him far too much. That was his undoing in the end. He was a complete rotter. The housemaid will unpack for you. Tea will be served in the library this afternoon. Shall I wait to show you down?
Oh, no, I'm sure I shall be able to find my way, thank you.
As you wish. But don't hesitate to ring if you need any help.
It was very brave of you to make your own way, Jane.
Oh, I did get rather lost, I'm afraid. It really is a very large house.
Yes, it's quite ridiculous, really. It was built by a Victorian ironmaster or something of the sort. Not very surprisingly, he went bankrupt soon afterwards. We've kept the centre of the house pretty well as it was. The great hall and the rooms next to it and above it. The rest has been divided off into offices and rooms for the teaching and psychiatric staff. The boys are all in the college building. You can see it across the lake.
Oh, and there is Gina. What a very beautiful girl she is.
Oh, yes, it's so lovely to have her back here again. I sent her to America at the beginning of the war. Did Ruth talk much about Gina?
No, she simply mentioned her, that was all.
Oh, poor Ruth. She felt terribly guilty about Gina's marriage. She doesn't realize, as I do, that the old class barriers have been broken down for good.
Gina married in America, then?
Yes. Yes, he was a Marine with a very good war record. Quite a hero, in fact. Gina was swept completely off her feet, and they were married within days of first setting eyes on each other.
But Ruth didn't consider he was right for Gina.
Well, she kept on insisting that no one knew anything about him. He came from the Middle West and had no money and no profession. However, by then it was too late. I was very relieved when Gina accepted my invitation to come over with him.
And how is he finding life here?
Well, he's rather a fish out of water at the moment, but there's so much going on around here, and if Walter wants to take up medicine or study psychiatry, Louis would give him every encouragement. And after all, this is Gina's home.
They really do make a remarkably handsome couple. I don't wonder Gina fell in love with him.
Oh, but that isn't Wally. That's Steve, the younger of the two Restorick boys. He runs our little theatre here. Louis says it gives the boys an outlet for their energies. He thinks that so much of juvenile crime is due to exhibitionism, and he sees the theatre as giving them a chance to express themselves. And Steve has been perfectly wonderful with them. He puts his whole heart into it.
It isn't any business of mine, but I suppose you realize that he's in love with her.
With Gina? Oh, no, I'm sure not.
You were always lost in the clouds, Carrie Louise. There's not the least doubt about it.
I've got some bad news, I'm afraid, dearest. It's that boy Jackie Flint. I really did think we'd set him on the right path, but he's been arrested for petty theft. Not even stuff he could possibly sell or even want for himself. Clearly we never got to the root of the trouble.
Louis, this is Miss Marple, you remember?
Of course. How do you do?
How do you do?
I'm so delighted you've come to stay with us for a while, Miss Marple. It will make such a difference to Caroline to have a friend from the old days with whom she can exchange memories. In many ways, she has rather a grim time here.
Oh, that's nonsense, Louis.
Not that it's all bad news. I've had a letter from that bank in Salisbury. They're very pleased with the progress the Morris boy's making. In fact, they're going to promote him. I always knew what he needed was responsibility. But aren't you coming in to tea?
I thought we were having it here. I told Jolly.
No, it's in the hall. All the others are there.
Tea seemed rather incongruous among the Gothic splendours of the great hall. Everything was piled haphazard on a tray, while utility cups mixed with the remnants of what had been Rockingham and Spode tea services.
Jane, this is my daughter Mildred. You haven't seen her since she was a tiny girl.
You haven't changed a bit, Aunt Jane. You're just as I remembered you.
She had always been a very plain little girl, and sadly she had grown into a plain woman, with a large, unimpressive face and dull eyes.
And this is Wally Hudd, Gina's husband.
Hi.
He was a big young man with his hair brushed up on his head and a sulky expression. He seemed concerned only with cramming cake into his mouth.
Surely we don't need to use those tatty old flats again. We could play the scene against the psych.
Gina and Stephen Restorick had eyes only for one another, and were carrying on a highly animated discussion about the set designs for the next production in the theatre. Edgar Lawson, sitting next to Mr. Sericold, glowered and refused pointedly to respond to anything that was said to him. It was very bewildering, and dinner that night was no better, with all the teachers and psychiatrists chatting away in their incomprehensible fashion. Eventually, they all trooped out to have a conference with Mr. Sericold.
I wonder if I ought to go and join them. Mr. Sericold may want me there.
Oh, no, I don't think so, Edgar. Louis simply wants to discuss some changes in the administration.
Oh, I certainly wouldn't want to go anywhere I'm not wanted. I've had quite enough of that today, with Gina making me look a fool at the railway station when I went to pick up Miss Marple.
Oh, for God's sake, Edgar, why can't you just grow up? Come on, Steve, let's get back to the theatre. Good night, everyone.
I know I'm not needed or wanted. I'm perfectly sure of that. If things had been different, if I'd had my proper place in life...
Oh, don't start all that again.
Now, Edgar, don't work yourself up about nothing. Jane thinks it was very kind of you to go and meet her. Gina always has these sudden impulses. I'm sure she didn't mean to upset you.
Oh, yes, she did. She deliberately set out to humiliate me.
Oh, Edgar.
You don't know half of what's going on here, Mrs. Sericold, but I'm not going to put up with it any longer. You'll see. You'll all see.
He really is the most odious young man. You shouldn't put up with such behaviour, Mother.
The poor boy's so sensitive. Louis says he just can't help it.
Everyone can help behaving rudely. Of course I blame Gina. She does nothing but make trouble. One day she encourages the young man, and the next she makes fun of him. What can you expect?
It's got nothing to do with Gina. The boy's crazy. That's all there is to it.
It took me a long time to get to sleep that night. What could it have been that had so alarmed Ruth Van Rydock? Stony Gates was evidently not a happy place. Mildred was obviously jealous of Gina, Stephen was equally obviously in love with her, and poor Wally Hudd was not enjoying himself at all. But surely none of this put Carrie Louise in any kind of danger. As for Edgar Lawson, there was something wrong there, something that worried me. But what was it?
Pulling up the weeds with your bare hands, Miss Marple. There ought to be some proper tools somewhere.
Well, it is such a pity to see this poor border so terribly neglected. Not that I imagine you ever bother your head about such things. Oh, you have much more important work to do with Mr. Sericold.
I suppose so. But I can't be sure. It's what's behind it all, you see.
Behind it all?
It's just that I'm in a very difficult position.
I see.
I don't know whether I ought to be telling you this.
Oh, don't concern yourself about an old and useless woman.
You see, Miss Marple, if I had my rights...
Yes?
I might as well tell you. You won't let it go any further.
Oh, no.
It's about my father. Nobody knows except Mr. Sericold. You see, it might cause a bit of trouble if it got out. I'm Winston Churchill's son.
Oh, I see.
There couldn't be a divorce, of course. No question of marriage. He's always done what he could. He's got enemies, and they're against me too. They watch me wherever I go. They make things go wrong for me. They're here, making the others dislike me. Mr. Sericold says that isn't true, but he doesn't know. Miss Marple.
Yes?
I want you to keep your eyes open. Find out who it is that's spying on me. You'll do that, won't you?
Yes, I'll certainly do that.
Good. Thank you. And now I must go and find Mr. Sericold.
He reminds me of someone. But who is it? And where was it?
What's he been going on about? Has he been telling you who his real father is?
Yes, as a matter of fact, he has.
Yesterday he said it was Marshal Montgomery. It doesn't seem very likely, does it?
No, it doesn't seem at all likely.
He told Gina something quite different, about being the rightful heir to the throne of Russia. Do you think he knows who his real father is?
I should imagine not. That's probably the trouble.
Nothing about this place makes any kind of sense. Take the house for a start. They're rich, these people, but just look at the way they live. The place is falling to bits. The tapestries are rotting on the walls, and the chair covers are worn to shreds. And look at the dress Mrs. Sericold was wearing last night. Darned under the arms, and nearly worn out.
Perhaps it's because things like that are of no importance to her.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I understand all about being poor. There's nothing wrong with it so long as you're prepared to work to make something of your life. I never had much money, but I put by enough to open a garage when the war ended. And then I met Gina. We were just like a couple of crazy kids. Everything was going just fine until that stuck-up aunt of hers started to make trouble.
Mrs. Van Rydock.
She said we should come to England, and that seemed fair enough. Gina wanted to see her grandmother, and this place was her home, after all. And I was curious to come over here anyway. Just to visit. That's what I thought.
But you hadn't reckoned on staying on here.
No, ma'am, I had not. And the place makes me feel like I'm tangled up in a spider's web. There's nothing for me here. And Gina isn't the girl I married. I can't understand her anymore. I can't even talk to her.
Yes, I can see it must be very difficult for you.
God knows why I'm telling you all this, but there's something about you. You kind of remind me of my Aunt Betsy back home. A lot of sense she had. She looked So frail you could snap her in two. But actually, she was tough. Well, I'll say she was tough. But here comes Mr. Sericold, and I know he'll try to sign me up for a course in criminal psychology or something of that sort. I must be off. It's been nice talking to you, ma'am.
Miss Marple, I'm so sorry. I'd planned to take you on a tour of our institution, but I'm afraid I've been called away. That boy I was telling you about yesterday, Jackie Flint, his case is coming up tomorrow in Liverpool, and I simply must be there. I shall do my best to persuade them not to prosecute and let me take over the boy. You see, in my experience, the magistrates nearly always take the wrong view. Sometimes they...
I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Sericold, but the car is here. I'll look after Miss Marple for you.
Yes, of course, I'd better be going. Oh, where's my briefcase?
It's in the car, Mr. Sericold.
Thank you, Jolly. Goodbye, Miss Marple.
Goodbye. Someday, that man will drop dead in his tracks. It's against human nature never to relax or rest. He only sleeps 4 hours a night.
He is very devoted to this place.
He never thinks of anything else. Never dreams of looking after his wife or of considering her in any way. She's a sweet creature, as you well know, Miss Marple, and she ought to have more love and attention. But nothing's thought of here except a lot of whining young men who want to live easily and dishonestly. What about the decent boys from decent homes? Why can't something be done for them?
I suppose because Mr. Sericold wouldn't find them very interesting.
And as for that young man, Edgar Lawson, I couldn't help noticing him haranguing you earlier. He ought to be locked up, in my humble opinion. But that wouldn't be the way of things in this place. Sometimes I think we're all sitting on a powder keg at Stoneygates. All it needs is one little spark for the whole thing to be blown sky high. And that young man is just the one to set it all off.
In part 1 of Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors, Miss Marple was played by June Whitfield. Carrie Louise, Ursula Howells. Ruth Van Rydock, Jill Balkan. Louis Sericold, Peter Howell. Mildred Street, Natasha Pine. Gina Hudd, Rebecca Lacey. Walter Hudd, Stephen Lucas. Juliet Belliver, Paula Jacobs. Edgar Lawson, Rhys Meredith. They Do It With Mirrors is dramatized for radio by Michael Bakewell and directed by Enid Williams.
At the urging of Ruth Van Rydock, I had gone to Stoneygates to stay with her sister, my old school friend Carrie Louise. Ruth was convinced that there was something wrong there, but had no idea what it might be. Stoneygates was a reformatory establishment for juvenile delinquents run by Carrie Louise's third husband, Louis Sericold. But I saw nothing there that might concern her. Far more disquieting, I thought, were the jealousies and tensions within her own family.
We present June Whitfield as Miss Marple in Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors.
Of course, Mother sees nothing that she doesn't choose to see. She's deliberately refusing to face up to the tragedy of Gina's marriage to that appalling American.
Tragedy? Do you really think it's as serious as all that, Mildred?
I told Mother at the time it was most unwise sending Gina off to live with Aunt Ruth in America for the duration of the war. After all, we had hardly any air raids in this part of the country.
It must have been difficult to decide what was right to do, you know, Mildred. Where children were concerned, I mean.
Mother has always been quite unreasonable about Gina. She was always spoiled and indulged in every way.
You must have had a very difficult childhood.
Oh, I'm so glad you appreciate that, Aunt Jane. Pippa, Gina's mother, wasn't my real sister at all. She was adopted, and, of course, she got all the attention. She was prettier than me, and she didn't know what shyness was. A child can suffer a great deal.
I know that very well.
What a lovely little girl, people would say to Mother, meaning Pippa, of course. And it was Pippa that Papa used to joke and play with. It was so unfair. I was their only child. She was nobody. A child whose parents didn't want her. Probably illegitimate.
Perhaps that was why they overindulged her.
It's a most un-Christian thing to say, but I was glad when she died. Now it's all come out in her daughter. There's bad blood there. Look at the way Gina's carrying on with Stephen Restorick, and with his brother Alex when he comes down here. Everyone but Mother notices it. Admittedly, Gina made a terrible mistake with her husband, but marriage is marriage, even if she is stuck with him.
Is he so dreadful?
Oh, dear Aunt Jane, he's so surly and uncouth. But then the whole place is so impossible. Look at the state of the gardens, not to mention the house. Why can't Mother employ proper servants? If the place were mine...
Yes, it must be sad for you to come back here and find everything so different. Do you really prefer living at Stonygates to somewhere of your own?
But this is my home. I was born here, and I have a right to be here if I choose, and I do choose. Whatever Lewis and his gang of cranks and criminals may do to the place, this was my father's house, and I have a part in it. Nothing can alter that.
Disquieting, yes, but hardly a positive threat to Carrie Louise. Carrie Louise. Why is it that only Ruth and I call her that? To Mr. Sericold she is Caroline. To Miss Belliver, Cara. Stephen Restorick seems to address her as Madonna, and Gina calls her Grande Dame, a kind of mixture of Grande Dame and Grandmamma. Is there some significance in the various names they find for her? Or is she simply a symbol to all of them, and not quite a real person?
You're looking very thoughtful today, Jane. May I know what you're thinking about?
You, Carrie Louise.
What about me?
Tell me honestly, is there anything here that's worrying you?
Worrying me? But Jane, what should worry me?
Well, most of us have worries. I have slugs, you know, and the difficulty of getting linen properly darned and not being able to obtain sugar candy for making my dams and jam. Oh, lots of little things. It seems unnatural that you have no worries at all.
Well, I suppose I must have, really. Lewis never gets any sleep, and Stephen never bothers to feed himself properly because he's too engrossed with that theatre. And Gina is very jumpy. But I've never been able to alter people. I don't see how you can. So it wouldn't be any good, my worrying, would it?
Mildred's not very happy either, is she?
Mildred is never happy. She wasn't as a child, and I doubt whether she was with her husband.
Perhaps she had cause not to be.
Because she was jealous of Pippa, you mean? Oh, yes, I dare say. But people don't really need a cause for feeling what they feel. They're just made that way. Don't you think so, Jane?
I expect you're right, Carrie Louise.
Of course, my being so free from cares is partly due to Jolly. She came to me when Johnny Restorick and I were just married, and she was wonderful from the first. She'd do anything for me. I feel quite ashamed sometimes. I really believe that Jolly would murder someone for me. Oh, isn't that an awful thing to say?
She is certainly very devoted.
Oh, she gets so indignant. She believes everybody ought to put me first. She's the one person who's totally unimpressed by Lewis's enthusiasm. She thinks this place is damp and bad for my rheumatism, and that I ought to go and live in Egypt or somewhere like that.
Do you suffer much from rheumatism?
Oh, it has got much worse lately. I find it difficult to walk. Horrible cramps in my legs. Old age creeping up on me, I suppose.
Cara, a telegram's just come over the telephone. Christian Gulbranson is arriving this afternoon.
Christian? Well, I'd no idea he was in England. It can't be a month since he was here last. What can he want?
Shall I put him in the oak suite as usual?
Oh, yes, it means he won't have to cope with the stairs.
I'll tell the others that he's coming.
Oh, thank you, Jolly. Christian Gulbrandsen is my stepson. Oh, Eric's eldest child. Actually, he's 2 years older than I am. Oh, how annoying that Louis is away.
The visit is something to do with the Institute, I suppose.
Well, I imagine so. And Christian hardly ever stays more than one night. He's an immensely busy man. Oh, what a nuisance for him.
Christian Gulbrandsen arrived late in the afternoon. He was a tall, heavy-featured man with a slow, very methodical way of talking. There was a strong resemblance between him and his sister Mildred.
What a very pleasant surprise. We hardly hoped to see you again so soon.
There was a distance of 30 years between them, and they might easily have been mistaken for father and daughter.
And how are you, Mildred?
I've not really been at all well lately.
That is bad. And how is little Gina? You and your husband are still here, then?
Oh, yes. We've quite settled down, haven't we, Wally?
Looks like it.
So, here I am with all the family again.
I could not help noticing that he seemed ill at ease, preoccupied in some way.
Oh, it's too bad that Louis is away. How long can you stay, Christian?
I mean to go tomorrow, but it is most important that I have a word with Louis. When will he be back?
Tomorrow afternoon or evening.
Then I must stay another night. It is unfortunate, but I have no alternative.
Was it really the affairs of the Institute that had brought him to Stony Gates? Every now and then he would cast a thoughtful, puzzled look at Carrie Louise when she was not aware of it. After tea, I retired to the library, where, rather to my surprise, he followed me and drew up a chair beside mine.
You are a very old friend, I understand, of dear Carrie Louise.
We were at school together in Italy many, many years ago.
Ah, yes. And naturally you are very fond of her.
Yes, very fond.
So I think is everyone. And that is as it should be, for she is a very dear and charming person. Always, since my father married her, she has been like a very dear sister. She was a faithful wife to him and loyal to all his ideas. She has never thought of herself, and always puts the welfare of others first.
Yes, for as long as I've known her, she has been an idealist.
An idealist? That is true. And therefore it may be that she does not always see the evil that is in the world.
Evil?
Tell me, how is her health? Have you noticed any change?
She seems very well. Apart from arthritis and rheumatism, she is beginning to find walking difficult.
Is that so? And her heart? How is her heart?
Her heart? There's nothing wrong with it as far as I know. But until yesterday, I'd not seen her for many years. If you want to know the state of her health, you should ask somebody in the house here. Miss Belliver, perhaps.
Yes, Miss Belliver. Or Mildred.
Yes, as you say, Mildred.
There is not between the mother and the daughter a very great sympathy, would you say?
No, I don't think there is.
It is a pity. Her own child. But there it is. And you think that this Miss Belliver is really attached to her?
Very much so.
And Carrie Louise depends on her.
So she says.
And then there is the granddaughter, the little Gina. But she's so young, and is not happy with her husband, I think. Sometimes it is hard to know what is best to be done.
Oh, so that's where you've got to, Christian. The psychiatrist in charge wants to know if there's anything you'd like to discuss with him.
I really need to speak to Louis before I do anything.
I'll tell him that, shall I?
No. I'd better go and have a word with him. Excuse me, Miss Marple.
Of course. I wonder whether something has gone wrong. Christian's very unlike himself today. Did he say anything?
He only asked about your mother's health.
Her health? Why should he ask you about that?
I really don't know.
Well, Mother's health is perfectly sound. Surprisingly so for a woman of her age. Much better than mine as far as that goes. I hope you told him so.
I don't really know anything about it. He asked me about her heart.
Her heart?
Yes.
Well, there's nothing wrong with Mother's heart. Nothing at all.
I'm delighted to hear it, my dear.
Who on earth has been putting all these odd ideas into Christian's head? What makes him think that there's something wrong with Mother?
To all appearances, the morning and afternoon of the following day passed uneventfully, but all the time I was aware of a strange inner tension. Christian Gulbrandsen chatted to teachers and some of the boys, and after lunch Gina took him out for a drive. But there seemed to be only one person he was really concerned to talk with.
Miss Belliver, I'd like a word with you, if you can spare me a moment.
I found that strange. If his visit was really to do with the running of the Institute, why should he want to talk to a woman who dealt only with the domestic side of Stony Gates and with Carrie Louise? At 4 o'clock in the afternoon I went into the garden and bumped, quite literally, into Edgar Lawson, who was looking wilder than ever.
Oh, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon.
Are you all right, Mr. Lawson?
All right? How could I possibly be all right? I've had a terrible shock.
What kind of shock?
Shall I tell you? I really don't know if I can. They're watching me all the time.
Come with me down this path, Mr. Lawson. Now, there are no trees or bushes nearby. No one can hear what you say.
I've made a terrible discovery. And I trusted everything you said so completely. But it was all lies. Lies to keep me from finding out the real truth. And he was the one person I really believed in. I thought he was my friend. And now to find out he's been at the bottom of it all along. It's he who is my real enemy. But I shall speak out. I shall shout it to all the world.
But who is he?
I'm speaking of my father.
Do you mean Winston Churchill?
Oh, no. They let me think that, to keep the truth away from me. But now I know. I've got a friend whom I can really trust, who has told me who my real father is. So now my father will have to reckon with me. I'll throw his lies in his face. I'll challenge him with the truth, and we'll see what he's got to say to that.
It was all very sad, and yet somewhere there was something wrong. Something I knew was there, but I couldn't quite grasp. I knew that Edgar Lawson reminded me of someone I had known in the past. But why was it important? And why could I not recall it? Was it someone in St. Mary Mead? Mr. Selkirk, the delivery man, perhaps? Or that absent-minded postman, what was his name, who had created so many problems? The day seemed to drag on painfully slowly, as if it too was waiting for the return of Louis Sericold. Gina came back and went for a long stroll with Stephen Restrick by the side of the lake, talking animatedly and looking into one another's eyes, and watched from the shadow of the trees by Walter Hudd. Louis Sericold arrived back at Stony Gates at 6:30. From my window I watched Christian Gulbrandsen go out to meet him. The two men paced backwards and forwards on the terrace below my room. As it happened, I had brought my bird glasses with me, and I thought I saw a flight of siskins by the clump of trees beyond the terrace. Through the glasses, I could see that both men looked seriously perturbed, and I could just catch faint snatches of their conversation as they walked.
I think it would be better if Carrie were not informed. It would come as a terrible shock.
I agree. If there's some way in which it could possibly be kept from her without further harm being done.
It is too great a responsibility to take. Perhaps we would do best to seek outside advice. But it is getting cold out here. Let us go inside.
Ruth Van Rydok had been right to be apprehensive. Whatever was the purpose of Gulbrandsen's visit, it certainly concerned Carrie Louise. Dinner that evening was a very subdued affair. Gulbrandsen and Sericold were both completely absorbed in their own thoughts. Walter Hudd looked sulky and miserable. Mildred glowered, and for once Stephen and Gina had nothing to say to each other. Afterwards, we all moved into the great hall. Stephen sat at the piano, strumming in an indeterminate sort of way.
If you will forgive me, Carrie, I shall go now to my room. I have an important letter to write.
Yes, of course. You're sure you have everything you need?
Yes, everything.
I put a typewriter in there earlier.
Miss Belliver has been most kind and attentive. Good night, Carrie. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Not going over to the theatre tonight, Gina?
No, Grandam, not tonight.
We're waiting for inspiration to strike. At the moment, inspiration is refusing to oblige.
Oh, Stephen, I'm sure something will come to us before long.
Somehow there's never enough light to read by in this place. Anybody object if I switch on the standard lamp?
No, of course not, Wally.
That blasted switch is always playing up. I'll go and fix the fuse.
Oh, Wally's so clever with electrical gadgets and things like that. You remember how he fixed the toaster?
It seems to be all he ever does here, fixing things. Have you taken your tonic tonight, Mother?
It's on the table by your chair, Clara.
Oh, thank you, Jolly. Such horrid stuff, and nobody lets me forget
I
it.
don't think you should take it tonight, my dear. I'm not sure it really agrees with you.
But Louis, why ever not?
Really, Mr. Sericold? What do you mean by that? Your wife has been so much better since she...
So, I have found you, oh mine enemy.
Edgar, what on earth is the matter?
You can say that to me. You know very well what's the matter. You've been spying on me, working with my enemies against me, telling lies about who I really am.
Now, Edgar, you really mustn't excite yourself. You're disturbing everyone. Let's talk it over quietly together. Come into my study.
No, I want everyone to hear this.
Let's talk together first. Come on.
Very well. But this time, I want the truth. Do you understand me?
I don't like the look in that boy's eye.
They've locked themselves in.
This time he's really gone off his head.
He's getting more dangerous every day. You've got to put a stop to it, Mother.
There's no harm in the boy, really, Mildred. He's fond of Louis, very fond of him.
Who do you think you're trying to fool? You can't keep up this ridiculous pretense any longer, you bastard!
He doesn't sound very fond of him.
He had something in his pocket.
I suppose if we were all in a movie, it would be a revolver.
I rather think you know that it was a revolver.
Everything you've told me is lies, lies, lies. It's you who's my father, you! You've cheated me, deprived me of my rights. I ought to own this place.
Now just calm down, Edgar. You know all this is nonsense.
You're going to tell me the truth. I'll make you tell the truth. I'll take that supercilious look off your face. I'm going to have my revenge. Revenge for all you've done to me. Revenge for the way you've made me suffer.
Put that revolver down!
Edgar will kill him. He's gone crazy. Can't we get the police?
There's no need to worry, Gina. Edgar loves Louis. He's just over-dramatising.
Yes, I've got a revolver and it's loaded. No, don't speak. Don't move. You're going to hear me out. It's you who started this little conspiracy against me, and now you're going to pay for it. To pay for it with your life.
The boy's gone raving mad, Clara. It's not just play acting. He really means it.
You must keep calm, Jolly. There's no real danger. You mustn't worry.
You sit there looking at me, pretending to be unmoved. Why don't you get down on your knees and beg for mercy? I'm going to shoot you, I tell you. I'm going to shoot you dead.
Carrie Louise, there must be something we can do.
He's going to kill your husband, I'm sure of it.
You thought you could keep it from the world forever, but it's too late. I'm your son, your unacknowledged son, the guilty secret you tried to keep hidden away, so that no one would ever know your shame.
That was a shot.
It's all right. It was from outside, somewhere in the park.
You set your spies to hound me down. You plotted against me. You, my father.
We can't just stay here and let this happen. We must do
You
something.
kept on filling me with lies, pretending to be kind to me, and all the time concealing the fact that I'm your son, your bastard son. You aren't fit to live. You're going to pay for it all now.
Those were from the study.
Oh, God, what are we going to do?
Edgar! Open the door! Edgar! Open this door!
I've got the keys. The trouble is, I don't know which is the right one.
The lights have come back on.
What the hell's going on? What's happened?
That awful crazy young man has shot Mr. Sericold.
Good God. Let me try to talk to him. Edgar, please let me in. Please, Edgar, please.
It's all right. It's all right. Don't worry. Everything's all right.
We thought you'd been shot.
Of course I haven't been shot.
But we heard shots.
Yes, he fired twice.
And he missed you.
Of course he missed me. Jolly, could you ask one of the doctors to come over? Poor Edgar needs a sedative.
Of course, I'll see to it. Shall I ring the police?
No, certainly not.
As you wish, Mr. Sarah.
Well, of course we shall ring the police. He's dangerous.
Nonsense! Does he look dangerous?
I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it.
The bullets went into the wall over here.
They went nowhere near me. He was just play acting.
I lost my head. I really believed for a moment it was all true.
Who told you Mr. Sericold was your father?
I don't know. I think it just came to me.
How the hell did you get hold of this gun?
Gun?
It's mine. You took it from my room, you creeping little louse.
All this can be gone into later.
You can't pretend it never happened. I am sick of the way you all carry on here. The boy's a dangerous lunatic. He ought to be locked up.
No, please, don't let them take me away, please.
For goodness sake, can't you see the guy's mad?
Please, Walter, the poor boy's suffered enough.
Suffered enough? He tried to kill Sericold with my gun, and all you can do is feel sorry for him?
Just calm down, Wally, and stop sounding like a bad gangster movie.
I've sent for the police. They'll be here as soon as they can.
But, Jolly, there was no need for that.
I told you I did not want the police summoned. This is a purely medical matter.
That's as may be. I've my own opinion. But I had to call the police. Mr. Gulbranson has been shot dead.
Christian, shot dead. But that's just not possible.
If you don't believe me, go and take a look for yourselves.
Is he in his room?
No, dearest, let me go. You stay with Miss Marple. Come with me, Jolly.
I just can't believe it. It doesn't make sense.
Possibly want to kill Christian.
The way things are in this place, practically anybody.
Good evening. Bro. What's going on? What on earth's the matter with you all?
For a moment, I thought I was seeing double. Surely the same man could not be standing by Gina and coming in by the front door at the same time.
Well, I'm sorry I'm so late. Well, there was a lot of fog on the road.
And then I realized it must be Stephen Rastrick's brother, Alex.
You did expect me. You got my wire.
Yes, of course, Alexis, dear. Only you see, things have been happening.
What things?
My brother Christian Gulbranson has been shot dead.
Good God. You mean he killed himself?
Oh, no. No, it couldn't be suicide, not Christian. Oh, no.
He would never kill himself.
When did all this happen?
Just before you arrived, about 3 or 4 minutes ago. We actually heard the shot, only we didn't really notice at the time.
You didn't notice it? Why not?
Well, you see, there were other things going on.
Edgar Lawson was trying to kill our stepfather. Luckily, he missed.
Mr. Sericold suggests that we should all go to the library. It would be more convenient for the police. Except, that is, for Mrs. Sericold. You've had a bad shock, Cara. I've ordered hot water bottles to be put into your bed. I'll take you up now.
No, not until I've seen Christian.
Oh, no, dear. You mustn't upset yourself.
Dear Jolly, you wouldn't understand. Jane, come with me, will you? I'll be quite sensible, Jolly. Don't worry.
Mr. Gulbranson had been sitting at the mahogany desk with a small portable typewriter in front of him. He sat there now, but slumped sideways. Louis Sericold was standing by the window.
My dearest, you shouldn't have come.
Oh, yes, Louis. I had to see him. One has to know exactly how things are.
You mustn't touch anything. The police must have things left exactly as we found them.
Of course. He was shot deliberately by someone then.
Oh, yes. I thought you knew that, Caroline.
I did, really. Christian would never commit suicide. And he was such a competent person that it couldn't possibly have been an accident. That only leaves murder. Dear Christian, he was always good to me. Bless you and thank you, dear Christian.
I wish to God I could have spared you this, Caroline.
You can't really spare anyone anything. Things always have to be faced sooner or later. And therefore it had better be sooner. I'll go and lie down now.
Shall I call Jolly?
No, that won't be necessary. Jane will look after me, won't you?
Yes, Carrie Louise. I will look after you.
You better stay here, Louis, and make sure nothing is disturbed.
Yeah.
The police will be here very soon.
In part 2 of Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors, Miss Marple was played by June Whitfield. Carrie Louise, Ursula Howells, Louis Serracold, Peter Howell, Christian Gulbranson, Stephen Thorne. Mildred Street, Natasha Pine, Gina Hudd, Rebecca Lacey, Walter Hudd, Stephen Lucas, Alex Restorick, Nick Waring, Stephen Restorick, Daniel Philpott, Juliet Belliver, Paula Jacobs, Edgar Lawson, Rhys Meredith. They Do It With Mirrors is dramatized for radio by Michael Bakewell and directed by Enid Williams.
I had gone down to Stonygates, the home of my old school friend Carrie Louise, where her husband, Louis Serracold, was running an establishment for juvenile delinquents. 3 nights after my arrival, a seriously disturbed young man had locked Mr. Serracold in his study and fired at him with a pistol. But while all this was taking place, Carrie Louise's stepson, Christian Gulbranson, had been shot dead in his room.
We present June Whitfield as Miss Marple in Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors.
We all gathered together in the library, too shocked to say anything very much. Inspector Curry and his team arrived at 11:30.
I'm afraid this must be most upsetting for you all, and I hope not to keep you up too long tonight. You must be particularly concerned for your wife, Mr. Serracold.
Thank you for being so considerate, Inspector.
Since it was Miss Belliver who found Mr. Gulbranson dead, I'm going to ask her to give me an outline of the general situation, as that will save too much repetition.
Of course.
Now, is there perhaps some room where we could talk undisturbed?
My study, Jolly?
I was just about to suggest it. This way, Inspector.
Thank you. You are the housekeeper here, I take it, Miss Belliver.
And secretary and general factotum, Inspector.
I'm sure you manage all your responsibilities most effectively. Now, I've had the main facts from Mr. Serracold. The dead man, Mr. Christian Gulbranson, was the eldest son of the late Eric Gulbranson, the founder of the Gulbranson Trust and all the rest of it, and Mrs. Serracold's first husband. He was, I understand, one of the trustees of the establishment here, and he arrived unexpectedly yesterday. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Mr. Serracold was away in Liverpool, and he returned this evening at around 6:30.
That is so.
After dinner, Mr. Gulbranson announced his intention of working in his own room and left the rest of the party in the Great Hall.
Yes, he said he had an important letter to write.
And was there any particular reason why he had been given a room on the ground floor?
He always stayed in that one, to save him trouble with the stairs.
Ah, I see. Now, tell me, how you came to discover him dead?
There was a rather unpleasant incident earlier this evening. A young man, a psychopathic case, became very upset and threatened Mr. Serracold with a revolver. He locked them together in this room and eventually let off the revolver. You can see the bullet holes in the wall there.
But Mr. Serracold was not hurt.
Fortunately, no. After that, the young man went completely to pieces. Mr. Serracold asked me to find one of the doctors to administer a sedative. On the way back, I went to Mr. Gulbranson's room to explain what was happening. I knocked, but there was no response, so I opened the door. I saw that Mr. Gulbranson was dead, and I telephoned you immediately.
Now tell me, were the doors to the house secured at that time? Could anyone have come in from the outside without being heard or seen?
It is possible. The side door to the terrace is not locked until we go to bed. People come in and go out that way to the college building.
And I understand there are about 200 delinquent boys living in the college.
Yes, that is so. But the college buildings are well secured. I should say it was most unlikely that anyone could break out.
Well, we shall have to check that, of course. Now, Miss Belliver, can you tell me the purpose of Mr. Gulbranson's visit?
I'm afraid I have no idea.
But he was put out to find Mr. Sericold absent and decided to wait until he returned.
Yes.
So his business here was definitely to do with Mr. Sericold.
I presume it had something to do with the Institute.
And did he have a conference with Mr. Sericold?
Oh, no. There was no time. Mr. Sericold didn't get back until just before dinner.
But after dinner, before he went off to write his letters, didn't he suggest a talk then?
No, he didn't.
Wasn't that rather odd, particularly since he came here on purpose to see Mr. Sericold?
Yes, Inspector. It was very odd.
And do you have any idea at what time Mr. Gulbranson was killed?
I think we may well have heard the shot. It was at 23 minutes past 9.
You actually heard a shot?
Yes.
And it didn't alarm you?
No. You see, it happened when the young man was locked in here with Mr. Sericold. He was threatening to kill him.
So it didn't occur to anyone that the shot might actually have come from within the house?
No. We were all so relieved, you see, that the shot didn't come from this room. You don't expect murder and attempted murder in the same house on the same night.
That's true enough.
In fact, when I came to think about it afterwards, I thought it might have been a backfire from Mr. Estrick's car.
Mr. Estrick's car?
Yes, Mr. Alex Restrick. He arrived by car this evening, just after all this happened.
I see. Now, when you discovered Mr. Gulbranson's body, did you touch anything in his room?
Oh, no. Naturally, I knew that nothing must be touched or moved.
And when you took us into the room on our arrival here, was everything exactly as it had been when you found the body?
One thing was different. There was nothing in the typewriter.
You mean that when you first went in, you saw that Mr. Gulbranson had been typing a letter, and that it had since then been removed?
Yes. I'm sure I saw the white edge of the paper sticking up.
Thank you, Miss Belliver. Who else went into the room before we arrived?
Mr. Sericold, of course, and Mrs. Sericold and Miss Marple. Mrs. Sericold insisted.
Who is Miss Marple?
The old lady with the white hair. She was a school friend of Mrs. Sericold. She came on a visit about 4 days ago.
Well, perhaps I ought to have a word with her before we go any further. It's rather unkind to keep an old lady like that from her bed. This must have been a shock to her.
Shall I ask her to come?
If you would be so kind.
It is so difficult, of course, because if you are looking at one thing, you cannot be looking at another, and one so often looks at the wrong thing that whether because one happens to do so, or whether because one is meant to, is very hard to say. Misdirection, the conjurers call it. Oh, they're so clever, aren't they? And I never have known how they manage it with a bowl of goldfish, because that really can't fold up small, can it?
Quite so. Now, Ma'am, I've had an account of the evening's events from Miss Belliver. First, there was this to-do between Mr. Sericold and Mr. Lawson.
Oh, a very odd young man. I have felt all along that there was something wrong about him. And then, after the excitement was over, we heard about Mr. Gulbranson's death.
Did you have much conversation with Mr. Gulbranson?
Oh, very little. He asked me about Mrs. Sericold's health. In particular about her heart.
Her heart? Is there something wrong with her heart?
Nothing whatever, I understand.
Did you hear a distant shot this evening during the quarrel between Mr. Sericold and Mr. Lawson?
I didn't actually hear it myself, because I am somewhat deaf. But Mrs. Sericold thought it came from somewhere outside in the park.
And Mr. Gulbranson went off to his room immediately after dinner, I understand?
Yes, that's right.
He didn't show any desire for a business conference with Mr. Sericold.
Oh, no, you see, they'd already had a little talk.
When was that? I was given to understand that Mr. Sericold didn't arrive home until shortly before dinner.
That is quite true. But he walked up through the park, and Mr. Gulbranson went out to meet him. They had a conversation together on the terrace.
And who else knows this?
Oh, probably no one. I just happened to be looking out of my window at some birds. I thought perhaps they might be siskins.
Siskins?
They're members of the Finch family, Carduelis spinus, I believe.
You didn't by any chance happen to overhear anything of what was said?
Only fragments, I'm afraid.
And could you tell me a little more about these fragments?
I do not know what was the actual subject of their conversation, but their immediate concern was to keep whatever it was from the knowledge of Mrs. Sericold. They also spoke of the possibility of taking outside advice. I think, you know, you had better ask Mr. Sericold himself about all that.
I shall certainly do so, ma'am. Now, is there anything else that struck you as unusual this evening?
There was one little incident. Mr. Sericold stopped his wife from taking her medicine. Miss Belliver was quite put out about it, but that, of course, is such a little thing.
I understand, Mr. Sericold, that Mr. Goldbranson arrived quite unexpectedly.
Yes, I hadn't the least notion he was coming.
And you have no idea why he came?
Oh, I know why he came. He told me.
When?
I walked out from the station. He was watching from the house and came out to meet me. It was then he explained what had brought him here.
I presume it was something to do with the Institute.
Oh, no. It was nothing to do with that.
Miss Belliver seemed to think it was.
Naturally, and neither Goldbranson nor I did anything to correct that impression.
Why was that?
Because it seemed important to both of us that no one should know the exact purpose of his visit.
And what was the real purpose, Mr. Sericold?
I fully realize, Inspector, that with Goldbranson's death, I've got to put all the facts before you, but if you can see your way to keeping what I have to tell you from my wife, I should be very grateful. You see, Christian Goldbranson came here to tell me that he believed my wife was being slowly and deliberately poisoned.
What?
You can imagine it came as a terrible shock, but as soon as Christian told me, I realized it explained certain symptoms of Caroline's. What she took to be rheumatism, leg cramps, and occasional sickness might well be the symptoms of arsenic poisoning.
Miss Marple told me that Goldbranson asked her about the condition of Mrs. Sericold's heart.
Did he? I suppose he was trying to explore any symptoms that could confirm his hypothesis.
But did he give you any actual evidence for his suspicions?
That was the first question I put to him. But he refused to divulge his source. He said that must wait until he had further proof.
Did he say who he thought might be administering the poison?
I don't think he actually knew. We were to have discussed it all at greater length tomorrow morning. It now begins to look as though the poisoner realized why Christian had returned to Stonygate. Otherwise, why should he be murdered?
He didn't even hint at anyone.
No, he didn't. He suggested we should seek the advice of Dr. Galbraith, the Bishop of Cromer, one of the trustees of the Institute.
But how would he have fitted into it all?
The Bishop is a very close and very dear friend of Carrie Louise, and he has a much deeper knowledge and understanding of the family than either Christian or, I will freely confess, myself. I had the impression that Christian's suspicions were only half-formed, that he was guided by what his mysterious informant had told him. He was hoping that the Bishop might be able to give us advice on how to proceed. He was actually typing a letter to Dr. Galbraith when he was shot.
How do you know that?
Because I took the letter out of the typewriter. I have it here.
You shouldn't have touched it, Mr. Sericold, nor anything else in the room.
Everything else is exactly as I found it, and I had a very good reason for removing the letter. I knew all too well that Carrie Louise would insist on seeing Christian's body, and I had no wish for her to see what he'd written. Read it, Inspector.
Dear Dr. Galbraith, if it is at all possible, I beg you to come to Stonygate as soon as you receive this. A crisis of extraordinary gravity has arisen, and I am at a loss how to deal with it. I know how deep your affection is for Carrie Louise, and how grave your concern will be for anything that affects her. How much has she got to know? To come immediately to the point, I have reason to believe that this sweet and innocent lady is being slowly poisoned. I began to suspect this during my last visit to Stonygate, but it was not until... And at this point I take it he was shot dead.
So it would appear.
Are you certain that he gave no indication as to whom he might have suspected?
No. No, none at all.
Have you any idea how the poison, supposing that Goldbranson was correct, is being administered.
I thought that over while I was changing for dinner. It seemed to me the most likely means was some tonic my wife was taking. We all partake of the same dishes at our meals, and my wife has nothing specially prepared for her. But almost anyone could add poison to her medicine bottle.
We'd better get it analysed.
Well, I already have a sample of it. Tonight I stopped my wife from taking her usual dose. It's still in a glass on the oak dresser in the great hall. The bottle of tonic itself is in the dining room.
You'll forgive me for asking this, Mr. Sericole, but why are you so anxious to keep this from your wife? Surely, for her own sake, it would be as well if she were warned.
Oh, that may well be so. But I don't think you quite understand. My wife is a completely trustful person. It would be inconceivable to her that anyone should want to kill her.
Yes, but even so...
But we have to go further than that. It isn't just anyone. Surely you can see it's quite possibly someone very near and dear to her. Think of the people who are living here in this house. Her husband, her daughter, her stepsons, whom she regards almost as her own, Miss Belliver, her devoted friend and companion for many years. Don't you see what it would do to her? That's why Christian wanted the bishop to come down here.
What about young, what's his name, Edgar Lawson?
But he's only been here a short time, and what possible motive could he have?
The boy's clearly unbalanced. What about this attack on you tonight?
Sheer childishness. He had no intention of harming me.
You don't wish to bring a charge against him?
That would be the worst thing possible for him, I mean. And in any case, poor Edgar could hardly have shot Gulbranson. He was in here threatening to shoot me.
Very well, Mr. Sericole. Let's concentrate on who could have killed Gulbranson. Had he any obvious enemies?
I should think it most unlikely. He simply was not that sort of man.
So it boils down, doesn't it, to this house and the people in it. Which of the people here had the opportunity to kill him?
That is difficult for me to say. I suppose from your point of view, all the members of my family are potential suspects. I can only say that as far as I know, everyone was in the Great Hall when Christian went to his room. And while I was there, no one left it.
Nobody at all?
Oh, yes. Some of the lights fused. Mr. Walter Hudd went to see to it.
That's the young American gentleman?
Yes. Of course, I have no idea what took place after I came in here with Lawson.
Gulbranson was shot with a small automatic pistol. Do you know if anyone in the house has a gun of that kind?
I have no idea. I should think it most unlikely.
Nevertheless, it must have belonged to someone. But it's getting late. I don't see the need to keep everyone up any longer. Tell them they can all go to bed, and I'll be back here first thing in the morning.
I don't think that anyone at Stonygate slept well that night. I certainly did not. And then as I was making my way towards the dining room the following morning...
Don't worry, Miss Marple, it's only the police.
The police?
They're firing off shots in the room where Uncle Christian was killed. I've no idea why. They've been here for ages. They started at 8:30 interrogating Alex. Come and have some breakfast.
Oh, thank you.
Good morning, Miss Marple. Please, sit yourself down.
Oh, thank you.
Would you like tea or coffee, Miss Marple?
Tea, please. I always think...
It's all rather like being in a gangster film, isn't it? Except that I gather I'm the top suspect.
Don't talk nonsense, Alex.
Why should the police suspect you, Mr. Esterick?
Well, it seems that I was driving up to the house at exactly the right time last night. And they've been checking up on how long I took between passing the lodge and arriving at the house. The police reckon I had time enough to leave the car, run round the house, go in through the side door, shoot Christian and get back to the car again.
So, what's your explanation? What were you really doing?
I thought little girls were taught not to ask indelicate questions. However, if you really want to know, I was sitting in the car, looking at the effect of the headlights on the fog, and wondering whether I could ever reproduce something like that on the stage.
And you don't think the police would accept that as an explanation?
I don't think it's very likely, do you? They'd give me one of those long, sceptical looks and say, "Thank you, Mr. Esterick."
But they can't possibly think that one of us killed Uncle Christian.
Oh, don't say it must have been a nasty tramp, darling. It's so hackneyed.
Miss Marple, I'm sorry to trouble you, but when you've finished your breakfast, will you go to the library?
You again, before any of us?
Oh, well...
Good morning.
Good morning, Mildred.
Some tea, please, Gina. Nothing to eat, just a little toast.
Yes, Aunt Mildred.
Where's that husband of yours this morning?
I've no idea. I haven't seen him. He's probably hanging around the police. He's absolutely fascinated by them.
Must make quite a change for him to be interested in something.
Well, I'd better be getting over to the theatre. I've got a class for some of the kids, and I don't want them hanging about.
I'll come and join you later.
Young people nowadays. You think he'd at least have the decency to put on a black tie?
I don't suppose he knew beforehand that a murder was going to happen, Mildred. But I must be on my way to the library.
Miss Marple, I hope I haven't dragged you away from our breakfast.
No, but I rather expected...
That it was the inspector who wanted to earn?
Yes.
No, they seem to be preoccupied with the details of the shooting. I'm afraid all this must be a terrible shock to you, to be at close quarters with murder.
Life in a village is not always as sheltered as people believe.
Miss Marple, I want your help.
Of course, Mr. Sericold.
It's a matter that affects my wife. I know how greatly you are attached to her.
Oh, yes, indeed, everyone is.
That's what I myself believe, but it seems that I am wrong. I'm going to tell you what Christian Gulbranson came here to confide in me, that Caroline is being slowly and quite cold-bloodedly poisoned.
I cannot believe it, Mr. Sericold. Surely he must have been mistaken.
That was exactly my own reaction.
I should have said that Carrie Louise did not have an enemy in the world.
But you see the implication, Miss Marple. Poisoning, slow poisoning, is an intimate family matter. It can only be someone in our closely knit little household.
Are you telling me that Mr. Gulbranson was right?
I fear there's no doubt about it. The police took away Caroline's medicine bottle last night, and the glass I would not let her drink from because of what Christian had told me. There was arsenic in both of them.
Then her rheumatism, her difficulty in walking...
Yes, leg cramps are typical of the effects of arsenic, I understand. Also, before you came, Caroline had several attacks of a gastric nature, but I never dreamt
So
that...
Ruth was right.
Ruth? Caroline's sister?
She came to me some weeks ago. She told me that she was worried about Carrie Louise, that she had a premonition that she was in some kind of danger. But she had no idea exactly what. She begged me to come here and find out what was really wrong.
That's very strange. I wonder if it could have been Ruth who...
Who what, Mr. Sericold?
Christian told me his suspicions were based on information given to him by a person he stubbornly refused to name. Was Ruth that person? Has her premonition become a certainty?
She said that there was something evil lurking at Stony Gates.
None of this is of any importance. The police now have positive proof, but you can see how I am placed, Miss Marple. Am I to tell Caroline?
Oh, no.
That's what I feel. That's what Christian felt. But should we feel that with an ordinary woman?
Carrie Louise is not an ordinary woman. She lives by her trust, by her belief in human nature. And until we have some inkling of who might be...
Yes, I agree. But in the meantime, Caroline's life is still in danger.
Do you mean you want me to watch over her?
You see, you're the only person I can trust. Everyone here seems devoted to her. But how can I be sure of that now?
I know it is a very unpleasant question to put to you, Mr. Sericold, but there are facts which must be faced. Who exactly would benefit if Carrie Louise were to die?
Money. It always boils down to money, doesn't it?
Well, in this case, there seems no other explanation. A sweet and gentle creature like Carrie Louise could hardly have an enemy. So it can only be a question of money, and you don't need me to tell you that people will quite often do anything for money.
I fear you're only too right. Inspector Curry has asked Caroline's solicitor to come down from London. He drew up not only her will, but that of her husband, Eric Gulbranson. If you would like me to put the whole matter of the legacies in simple terms for you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sericold. So mystifying the law, I always think.
Eric Gulbranson, after endowing the various colleges and having set up several fellowships and trusts and other charitable bequests, settled equal sums on his daughter Mildred and his adopted daughter Pippa.
Gina's mother?
Yes. And the remainder of his enormous fortune was left in trust, the income to be paid to Caroline for her lifetime.
And after her death?
It was to be divided equally between Mildred and Pippa, or to their children if they themselves predeceased Caroline.
So in fact, this very considerable sum of money will now go to Mildred and Gina.
Yes, and Caroline has a sizable fortune of her own. They're not exactly in the Gulbranson class. Half of this she made over to me 4 years ago. Of the remainder, she's left £10,000 to Juliet Belliver, and the rest to be divided equally between Alex and Stephen Restorick, her two stepsons.
Oh dear, that is bad. That's very bad.
What do you mean by that, Miss Marple?
It means that everyone in the house has a financial motive.
I'm afraid that's undeniable. And yet I cannot believe that any of these people would even contemplate murdering Caroline. Mildred's already well provided for, as is Gina. And the two Restorick boys simply worship their stepmother. If it were not for the evidence of the medicine bottle, I would reckon that Christian had somehow made a ghastly mistake.
There is one person in your family you've not mentioned.
Is there? Oh, of course, Gina's husband. I'd completely forgotten him.
One can't help seeing that Walter Hudd is a very unhappy man.
He hasn't fitted in here, it's true. He's no interest or sympathy in what we're trying to do. But after all, why should he? He's young and crude, and comes from a country where a man is esteemed by the success he makes of his life.
Whilst we are very fond of failures, I think sometimes, you know, one can overdo things the other way. I mean, young people brought up wisely in a good home, and with grit and pluck and the ability to get on in life, well, when one comes down to it, they are really the sort of people a country needs.
But surely one cannot simply...
Not that I don't appreciate the really noble work you're doing here. But don't you think the English are rather inclined to make too much of their failures and defeats? Foreigners can never understand why we are so proud of Dunkirk. And look at the charge of the Light Brigade. What I really mean is, everything here must seem rather peculiar to young Walter Hudd.
Yes, I quite see your point, and the boy certainly has a very fine war record. There's no doubt about his bravery.
Not that that helps very much, because war is one thing and everyday life is quite another. And to commit murder, I suppose a certain amount of bravery is needed, or at least a great deal of conceit.
But surely the boy does not have any real motive.
Why not? He hates it here. He wants to get away. And if it really is money he wants, it would be important to get Gina away before she forms an attachment to somebody else.
What on earth do you mean by that?
Surely you must have noticed. Both the Restorick brothers are in love with her.
Oh, you're imagining things, Miss Marple.
I don't think I am. And what if Gina is in love with one of them? Wouldn't she want to move heaven and earth to get rid of her husband?
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Marple, but all this is quite preposterous.
Is it? As I told you, money makes people do preposterous things, and there is a great deal of it at stake. I don't like greed, and I don't like murder, and I am going to watch over Carrie Louise as if my own life depended upon it. You can count on that, Mr. Sericold.
I believe you, Miss Marple. And whatever else may happen, I rest secure in the knowledge that Caroline will be safe in your hands.
In Part 3 of Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors, Miss Marple was played by June Whitfield. Louis Sericold, Peter Howell, Inspector Curry, Keith Barron. Mildred Street, Natasha Pine, Gina Hudd, Rebecca Lacey, Alex Restorick, Nick Waring, Juliet Belliver, Paula Jacobs. They Do It With Mirrors is dramatized to radio by Michael Bakewell and directed by Enid Williams.
I had come to Stonygates because I had been told that my old school friend Carrie Louise was in danger. Christian Gulbranson, her stepson, had come to Stonygates to warn her husband, Louis Sericold, that she was being slowly and deliberately poisoned. And then Gulbranson had been murdered. It seemed that the poisoner and the murderer must be one and the same person, But which of Carrie Louise's beloved family was trying to lay hands on her considerable fortune?
We present June Whitfield as Miss Marple in Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors.
Well, Miss Marple, I've been having a word with Superintendent Blackett at the Yard, and he tells me that you're not quite what you seem. Apparently, you're rather an old hand at the murder business.
I must admit that I have rather more than a nodding acquaintance, yes.
So I'd like to have your opinion. Who should we be concentrating on, the granddaughter's American husband?
Oh, that would certainly be very convenient for everybody.
I lost my best girl to a Yank during the war, so maybe I'm biased. Who do you think has been secretly poisoning Mrs. Sericold?
Well, human nature being what it is, one is always inclined to think of the husband. But in this case, I cannot seriously consider Mr. Sericold. He really is devoted to Carrie Louise. He doesn't make a show of it. It's very quiet, but it's very genuine. He loves his wife, and I'm certain he would never dream of poisoning her.
To say nothing of the fact that he wouldn't have any motive for doing so. She's made over her money to him already.
I am really afraid we shall have to wash him out.
Regrettable, isn't it? And anyway, he couldn't have killed Gulbranson. He was locked in the study with Edgar Lawson.
Quite.
We've got to concentrate on the people who did have an opportunity, and our prize suspect is Walter Hudd. He left the hall very shortly after Gulbranson went to his room.
That blasted switch is always playing up. I'll go and fix the fuse.
He could easily have contrived that, and the fuse box is in the kitchen passage which opens off the main corridor just across from Gulbranson's room. He was perfectly placed to commit the crime.
And who is suspect number 2?
Alex Restorick, who was alone in his car on the road between the lodge and the house at the time Gulbranson was shot, and who took far too long getting here.
I'm sorry I'm so late. There was a lot of fog on the road.
Anybody else?
That's where you come in. You were in the hall at the time. You can tell me who left it.
I agree that I ought to be able to tell you, but all our attention was concentrated on Mr. Sericold, locked in the study with that wild young man.
I'm going to have my revenge. Revenge for all you've done to me.
He was shouting out the most terrible things. We could hear them quite plainly. And what with that and the lights fusing, I didn't really notice anything else.
You mean that while all that was going on, anybody could have slipped out of the hall and along the corridor, shot Gulbranson, and slipped back in again?
It would have been quite possible.
Could you say definitely that any of the people in the hall were there for the whole time?
Mrs. Sericold certainly was, because I was watching her. It surprised me, you know, how she managed to remain so calm.
And the others?
Miss Belliver went out, but I'm almost certain that was after we heard the shot. As for Mildred Street, I simply don't know. She was sitting behind me, you see. Gina was over by the far window, but again, I can't be certain she was there for the whole time. Stephen Restorick was at the piano, but he stopped playing when the shouting began, and he could easily have crept away. It was so dark, you see.
So we can only safely rule out Mrs. Sericold in the hall and Mr. Sericold and Edgar Lawson in the study. It's very unfortunate that Gulbranson should be shot on the same evening as the schmozzle between Sericold and Lawson.
Simply unfortunate, do you think?
How do you mean, Miss Marple?
It occurred to me that it might have been contrived.
Contrived? In what way?
Well, everybody seems to think it very odd that Edgar should quite suddenly have a relapse, so to speak. He has this complex, or whatever you call it, about his unknown father, Winston Churchill or whoever. Suppose that somebody put it into his head that Louis Sericold is really his father. In his weak mental state, he'll work himself into a frenzy and make the kind of scene he did make. What a wonderful cover that would be. especially if someone has thoughtfully supplied him with a revolver.
Walter Hudd. It was his revolver. Funny how everything points to him.
I must have been away from the hall repairing that fuse for around 10 minutes. The fuse box is in an awkward place. I had to get steps and a candle.
And this revolver of yours, where do you keep it?
In the drawer of the desk in my room.
Who knew that you kept it there?
I wouldn't have any idea who knows what in this crazy place. The drawer wasn't locked, nor was my room.
So when you'd fixed the fuse and come back to the hall, was everybody else there?
Gina was there, and the old lady with white hair, and Miss Belliver, I think. I didn't notice particularly.
Mr. Hudd, do you have any idea who might have shot Christian Gulbranson?
One of the bright boys from the college, practicing his technique?
No, we've established that no one could have broken out of there after dark.
I wouldn't put it past them. But if you want someone nearer home, what about Alex Restorick?
Why him?
He had the opportunity.
And why should he kill Gulbranson?
The Restorick brothers depend for everything on the Saracolds. Maybe old Gulbranson had heard something nasty about Alex and was going to tell them.
With what results?
They might have cut off the money supply. Alex gets through a good deal of it by all accounts.
On his theatrical enterprises?
Is that what he calls them?
What do you mean by that?
Oh, nothing much. Alex Restorick makes a great song and dance about art. But my guess would be that all he's really interested in is money, and things that don't belong to him.
I don't expect you to believe me, Inspector. I'm just telling you what happened. While I was driving from the lodge towards the house, I suddenly noticed the effect of the headlights on the swirling fog. It was magical, and by an extraordinary coincidence, exactly the kind of thing I was planning for my next production. And then, on top of that, the shots and the running footsteps. Well, it was sheer...
You heard shots? Where?
Out of the fog, Inspector.
It didn't occur to you that anything was wrong?
I told you I was thinking about the play. It could have been anything. A lorry backfiring on the main road, a poacher shooting rabbits.
They're mostly snare rabbits round here. How many shots?
I don't know. 2 or 3? 2 close together. I do remember that.
And these running footsteps, where were they?
Somewhere near the house.
That would imply that the murderer of Christian Gulbranson came from outside.
Of course. You're surely not suggesting he was killed by one of the family?
How often do you come down here, Mr. Restorick?
It varies. Sometimes not for several weeks, but I try to get to Stonygates when I can. It's my true home, you see.
Mrs. Saracold has encouraged you to think that.
What I owe Mrs. Saracold can never be repaid. Sympathy, understanding, affection.
And quite a lot of hard cash, I imagine. Has she ever spoken to you about her will?
Certainly, but what's that got to do with anything? There's nothing wrong with her, is there?
I see you're not wearing mourning, Mrs. Hudd.
I haven't got any. And anyway, Christian wasn't really a relation. He was my grandmother's stepson.
You were in the Great Hall last night when the encounter between Mr. Saracold and Mr. Lawson took place.
Oh, yes, it was quite fantastic. And it was Wally's revolver. I would never have believed that Edgar would have had the guts to pinch it out of his room.
Were you alarmed when they went into the study and Edgar Lawson locked the door?
Oh, no, I loved it. He was all such ham, you know, so madly theatrical. Everything Edgar does is always ridiculous. One can't take him seriously for a moment.
Who was in the hall while all this was going on?
Oh, we all were.
Not all, Mrs. Hudd. People went in and out. Your husband, for instance.
Yes, he went to see to the lights. Wally's great at fixing things.
During his absence, a shot was heard, I understand. A shot that you all thought came from the park.
I don't remember that. Oh, yes. It was just after the lights had come on again, and Wally had come back.
Of course, all that business about Alex Restorick hearing running footsteps needs to be taken with a large pinch of salt. A way of diverting attention away from himself, if I'm not much mistaken.
Yes, although I suppose one must allow for the mind of the creative artist.
He thinks a lot of himself, does that young man. So does his brother Stephen. He admitted to me that he takes more than a passing interest in Gina Hudd, and that he expected her marriage to break up before long. One of those war affairs, was how he put it.
And Gina Hudd, what did you gather from her?
Not a lot. But she did go out of her way to mention that her husband returned from fixing the lights before the shot was heard.
Oh, but that is not the case. He did not return until just before Mr. Sericold unlocked the study door. It suggests a greater degree of loyalty to her husband than one might have expected.
Perhaps the marriage isn't so near to breakdown as Stephen Westerick hopes. But I'd better be getting back to the house. Mrs. Street has been kicking up a rumpus because I haven't talked to her yet.
I should have thought I'd have been the first person you would have interviewed. Christian was my brother, after all.
I'm very sorry, Mrs. Street, but you see, we always start with the less important evidence, get it out of the way, so to speak. It's essential to keep to the last someone upon whose judgment we can rely.
Oh, I see.
After all, you are the daughter of the house, and you can tell me all about the people who are in it.
I can certainly do that.
So you see, when we come to the question of who killed Christian Goldbranson, we particularly need your help.
But surely it's perfectly obvious who killed my brother. That odious husband of Gina's. He's the only stranger here.
But why should he want to kill Mr. Goldbranson?
Because Christian had found out something criminal about him. He saw Walter Hudd when he was here a month ago, and perhaps he made inquiries about him in the United States. Naturally, he had agents all over the world, and discovered what kind of man he really is. Anyway, Christian came back here to show Walter up for what he is, and Walter shot him.
It could be, yes.
You see, Walter had to prevent Gina from learning the truth about him. After all, she's his bread and butter. When my mother dies, a very large fortune will come to Gina.
Your mother isn't very strong, is she?
Well, my mother has always been delicate.
You haven't noticed any change for the worse in her health lately?
She suffers from rheumatism, but then most people have something wrong with them as they get older. I've no sympathy with persons who make a fuss over inevitable aches and pains.
Does Mrs. Sericold make a fuss?
She does not make a fuss, but she enjoys being made a fuss of. My stepfather is far too solicitous, and as for Miss Belliver, she makes herself ridiculous.
There's one thing I don't quite understand about the setup here, and that's the position of the two Resterick brothers.
Oh, it's just foolish sentiment. Their father married my poor mother for her money, bringing into the family 2 sons from a previous marriage. 2 years later, he ran away with a Yugoslavian singer of notorious morals. And since it was manifestly impossible for the boys to spend their holidays with her, my mother more or less adopted them. They've been hanging on here ever since.
And they both stand to benefit from Mrs. Sericold's death?
Yes, they do. But why are you harping on about my mother? It's my brother who's been murdered. My mother may be growing old, and naturally one
Death will come at its appointed time, but not ahead of it, Mrs. Street. That's what we have to prevent.
Then if I were you, Inspector, I'd begin by locking up that young man who tried to kill my stepfather. He's not safe to be allowed out loose.
I know that what I did was very wrong, making that terrible scene and shooting off that pistol. If I've got to be had up for that, I'll come with you whenever you wish. I'll plead guilty.
No charge has been made against you. According to Mr. Sericold, the shots you fired at him were an accident.
He's a good, kind man. He's done everything for me.
What made you act as you did, Mr. Lawson?
I made a fool of myself.
So it seems. You told Mr. Sericold that you had discovered he was your real father. Was that true?
No.
Well, who put the idea into your head? Did someone suggest it to you?
Well, it's a bit hard to explain.
Suppose you have a try.
Well, you see, I had a rather hard time as a kid.
Yes?
The other boys took it out on me because I hadn't got a father. He was a foreign seaman, I believe. So when I went to a new school, I started to make up a few things. Said my father was an admiral and so on. And then, later, I used to stay at hotels and told a lot of silly lies about being a fighter pilot in the war. I didn't really intend to get money by it. It was just that I wanted to make people think a bit more of me.
And was this when Mr. Sericold came on the scene?
He said he needed a secretary to help him. And I did help him, I really did. Only the others were always laughing at me.
What others?
Gina treated me like dirt. She'd lead me on, and then make fun of me. And Mrs. Street looked down on me for not being a gentleman. So did Miss Belliver. And what's she? Just a paid companion.
Why was this? Why did they take it out on you?
It was because of me being a bastard.
So you appropriated 1 or 2 famous fathers.
I always seem to be telling lies.
And finally you said Mr. Sericolt was your father.
Because that would stop them once and for all.
But then you accused him of being your enemy.
I know. There are times when I don't get things quite right. I get muddled.
And you took that revolver from Walter Hudd's room.
Did I? Is that where I got it?
Don't you remember?
I couldn't have got hold of it any other way, could I?
Well, somebody might have given it to you.
Is that how it happened? I was so worked up. I walked about the garden in a red mist of rage. I thought people were spying on me, watching me, trying to hound me down. Even that nice white-haired old lady. I can't understand it all now. I don't remember where I was or what I was doing half the time.
Surely you must remember who told you Mr. Sericolt was your father.
Nobody told me. It just came to me.
It looks as if you were right, Miss Marple. I'll swear that someone put him up to the idea that Sericolt was his father and steered him in the direction of Walter Hudd's revolver.
But he gave no indication of whom it might have been.
On the one hand, he says it was his idea, and then he tells me he can't remember. But at least we are one step further forward. My sergeant found the murder weapon, a small automatic pistol.
Where was it?
It was in the music stool by the piano in the Great Hall.
Where Stephen Restorick was sitting just before the murder.
10 to 1, that's why it was put there. But I'm not jumping to any conclusions. Look, Miss Marple, I need to talk to Mrs. Sericolt. But I can't just barge in. Could you find out if she's up to seeing me?
I'll be ready for him in a few minutes, Jane. Oh, Jolly has been fussing me so. And Gina creeps about as if I were at death's door. I don't think people realize that tragedies like Christian's death are much less shocking to someone old, because by then one knows how little anything really matters in this world.
But Christian was murdered.
And you think that does matter?
Don't you?
Not to Christian. It matters, of course, to whoever murdered him.
Have you any idea who did?
No, I have absolutely no idea. I can't even think of a reason. It must have been something to do with his having been here before, just over a month ago, because otherwise I don't think he would have come here suddenly again for no particular reason. Whatever it was must have started off then. I've thought and I've thought, but I can't remember anything unusual.
Who was here at that time?
Oh, the same people who are here now. And Ruth was here.
Ruth?
A usual flying visit. You're all keeping something from me, aren't you?
Why do you say that?
Because you all are, even Louis. He came in while I was having my breakfast. And he drank some of my coffee and even had a bite of toast and marmalade. And it's so unlike him because he always has tea and can't abide marmalade. He must have had his mind on something else, and I suppose he'd forgotten to have his breakfast.
What are you thinking about, Carrie Louise?
I was thinking about Gina and what you said about Stephen being in love with her. Oh. Girls like Gina need to kick up their heels a bit. Well, they're young and they like to feel their power. It's natural, really. And it's so very important that Gina should be happy.
It's important, I suppose, that everyone should be happy.
Oh, yes, but Gina's a very special case. When we adopted her mother, Pippa, we felt it was an experiment that simply had to succeed. You see, Jane, Pippa's mother...
What about her?
Yes, I'm sorry. Eric and I agreed we should never tell anyone.
I would like to know.
Even Pippa didn't know it.
Know what? This isn't just idle curiosity. I need to know. I can hold my tongue, Carrie Louise.
You could always be trusted to keep secrets, Jane. Pippa's mother was Catherine Ellsworthy.
The woman who poisoned her husband with arsenic?
Yes.
She was hanged?
Yes.
And Pippa was her daughter.
Eric and I were determined to give the child a fresh start in life, with all the love and care that a child needs. And we succeeded. Pippa was the sweetest, happiest creature imaginable.
Thank you for telling me, Carrie Louise.
And now I'm ready for Inspector Curry. Perhaps you could ask him if he'd be kind enough to come up to my sitting room. He won't mind, I'm sure.
The point on which I'd be especially grateful for your help, Mrs. Sericold, is this. During the row between your husband and Lawson in the study, were you aware of anyone leaving the hall?
Wally had already gone to see about the lights. Miss Belliver went out shortly afterwards to get something, but I can't remember what.
Did anybody else leave the hall?
Nobody, as far as I know.
But would you know, Mrs. Sericold?
No, I don't think I should.
You were completely absorbed in what you could hear going on in the study.
Yes, Inspector, I was.
And you were apprehensive about what might happen.
No, I wouldn't say that. I didn't think that anything would happen, you see.
But Lawson had a revolver.
Yes.
And was threatening your husband with it.
Yes, but he didn't mean it.
You can't possibly be sure of that, Mrs. Sericold.
But I was. He was putting on an act. Edgar's only a boy. He was being melodramatic and silly and fancying himself as a bold, desperate character, seeing himself as the wronged hero in a romantic story. I was quite sure he'd never fire the revolver.
But he did fire it, Mrs. Sericold.
I expect it went off by accident. But what I can't understand is what could have provoked it all. He'd been so very much better, really practically normal. Indeed, he always seemed normal to me.
That revolver he had, he presumably took from Walter Hudd's room. But I'd like you to take a look at this. Have you ever seen this automatic pistol before?
No, I don't think so. No.
We found it in the piano stool. It had been fired quite recently. It is almost certainly the weapon with which Mr. Goldbranson was shot.
And it was in the piano stool, you say?
Under some old music. And you remember who was at the piano last night?
Stephen.
He was playing?
Oh, he was just strumming very softly. A funny, melancholy little tune.
And when did he stop playing, Mrs. Sericold?
I don't know.
Did he get up from the piano during the quarrel?
I don't know. I've no idea what he was doing. Not until he came over to the study door to try to fit a key into the lock.
Can you think of any reason why Stephen Restorick should shoot Mr. Goldbranson?
None whatsoever. I don't believe he did.
Goldbranson might have found out something discreditable about him.
It seems very unlikely. You see, Inspector, Stephen just isn't that kind of person. There are no dark secrets in our family, and certainly nothing that could lead to murder.
Grandam, darling, are you all right? You haven't been bullied or given a 3rd degree or anything?
Of course not, Gina. What ideas you have.
Now, you mustn't tire yourself, Carrie Louise.
Oh, Jane, you're getting as fussy as the rest of them.
I've got all your letters here and a parcel.
Well, bring them into the library. I'll deal with them there.
Do you always get quite so many letters? They must take up half your day.
Oh, I don't handle all of them. The ones from the boys' relations I hand over to the college staff. I do deal with all the begging letters, though. I can't possibly leave them to Lewis.
Oh, why don't you open the parcel, Grandam? I always open the parcels first.
Oh, you're such a child, Gina. Very well. Oh, someone must know it's my birthday soon. It's very pretty paper.
Oh, chocolates! Aren't you lucky? Here's a card.
With love from Alex. How odd of him to send me a box of chocolates by post when he was coming here.
They look absolutely scrumptious. Look, Grandam, they're your favourite Kirsch ones.
Oh, so there are.
Just a minute, Carrie Louise.
I was just going to offer one to Gina.
Well, not just yet. Is Alex about the house? Do you know, Gina?
Yes, he was in the hall a moment ago. I'll call him. Alex! Alex!
I don't understand. What's this all about, Jane?
What is it? Oh, Madonna, darling, I didn't realise you'd come down. How are you feeling?
Carrie Louise wants to thank you for the chocolates.
What chocolates?
Oh, these chocolates.
But I never sent you any chocolates, darling.
The box has got your card on it.
Oh, very odd. I certainly didn't send them.
I think perhaps Inspector Curry ought to take a look, just to be on the safe side.
Yes, these ones here have certainly been tampered with. There's a slight line on the underside, as if they'd been slit open. We'll get them analysed, but I don't think there's much doubt as to what we shall find. It seems incredible. Anyone in the house might have been poisoned.
No, not anyone, Inspector. Gina said that these are the kirsch-flavoured ones, Carrie Louise's favourites. So whoever did this must be someone who is close to her, a member of the family circle.
If that's the case, Miss Marple, we can no longer risk not telling her. Mrs. Sericold will have to know what is going on. She must be put on her guard.
Is it really true, Jane?
I'm afraid so, my dear.
I've always thought I knew what was real and what wasn't. This doesn't seem real, but it is. So I may be wrong everywhere. But who could possibly want to do such a thing to me?
It seems that Christian suspected something of the sort. He told Louis so.
Oh, and that explains it.
Explains what?
Why he was not at all his usual self. It was as though he was always on the point of saying something and then not saying it. Why not tell me? It's so much simpler just to say it straight out.
He didn't want to cause you pain.
I just cannot believe any of it. Edgar shooting at Louis, Gina and Stephen having an affair, and now this ridiculous box of poisoned chocolates. It can't be true, Jane. It just can't be true.
In Part 4 of Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors, Miss Marple was played by June Whitfield. Carrie Louise, Ursula Howells. Inspector Curry, Keith Barron. Mildred Street, Natasha Pine. Gina Hudd, Rebecca Lacey. Walter Hudd, Stephen Lucas. Alex Restorick, Nick Waring. Edgar Lawson, Rhys Meredith. They Do It With Mirrors is dramatised for radio by Michael Bakewell and directed by Enid Williams.
I had come to Stonygates because I had been told there was something threatening my old school friend Carrie Louise. Her stepson, Christian Gulbranson, had warned her husband that someone was trying to poison her, and Gulbranson had been shot dead. And now she had been sent a box of chocolates containing arsenic.
We present June Whitfield as Miss Marple in Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors.
Now the fact that someone was trying to murder Carrie Louise was out in the open. The jealousies and rivalries within her family could no longer be kept hidden. I took my knitting out onto the terrace and just happened to overhear Gina Hudd and Stephen Restorick.
It's quite extraordinary the way news gets round this place. Even the boys in the college have got to hear about Grandam and the chocolates.
How'd you know that?
Ernie Gregg told me. He was helping me paint the backcloth.
Oh, the kid who made a jolly good stab at Fest Day when we were doing 12th Night.
That's the one. And they all know about the card from Alex with the chocolates. But Grandam hasn't got an enemy in the world. Who could possibly want to get rid of her?
Well, one person certainly springs to mind.
I suppose you mean Wally? He may not care for her very much, but what conceivable reason could he have for killing her?
There's a great deal of money at stake, my pet. And perhaps he wants to be certain of getting his hands on your grandfather's inheritance while he's still married to you.
What do you mean, still married?
Oh, you know very well what I mean, Gina. Your marriage is on the rocks. You don't belong together anymore. And the sooner you both split up, the happier everyone will be.
I've no idea what Wally feels about our marriage. I've no idea what he feels about anything anymore. He hardly speaks to me. He's become a completely different person since we came here. Why do people have to change, Stephen?
Do I change?
No, you're always exactly the same. Do you remember the way I always used to tag round after you when we were kids?
And I thought you were a most frightful little nuisance. Well, the tables are turned now, aren't they?
What do you mean by that?
You've got me exactly where you want me. Haven't you, Gina?
And with that, he turned and walked back towards the house, leaving Gina with a slightly bemused smile on her face. A few minutes later, she was joined by Alex.
Have you heard what that little wretch Ernie Gregg is telling everyone now? That he got out of college last night and went wandering around the grounds, and that he could tell the police a thing or two about the murder if they cared to ask him.
I don't believe a word of it. He's just trying to make himself seem important. He'd say anything to draw attention to himself. Poor Ernie, he's quite a sweet kid, really.
And has he joined the list of your admirers?
Go easy. Ernie's only 16.
I don't see how that disqualifies him. You're managing us all very well at the moment, aren't you? Me and my dear little brother and that large, dull husband of yours.
I've no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, yes, you have. Little Ernie's nursing an adolescent crush. Edgar Lawson's biting his lip with frustrated passion. Stephen's in love with you. I'm in love with you. And even poor Wally's in love with you. What more could a woman want? Well, at least you're honest about it. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to marry Stephen, or are you going to marry me?
Aren't you forgetting that I'm still married to Wally?
Temporarily. Every woman's allowed to make one mistake matrimonially, but there's no need to get stuck with it. Having tried the show out in the provinces, the time has come to bring it into the West End.
And you're the West End?
Undoubtedly.
Alex.
Gina! You abandoned, beastly little slut! I always knew you were a bad lot. And you're not only an adulteress, you're a murderess into the bargain.
Don't be ridiculous.
You don't even know who your mother was or where she came from. A criminal's child or a prostitute's child, most likely. That's the sort of person they would have adopted. They might have remembered that bad blood will tell.
You've gone out of your mind.
Someone tried to poison Mother, and who's the most likely person to do that? Who comes into an enormous fortune if Mother dies? You do, Gina. And you may be sure the police haven't forgotten the fact.
Lucky you haven't got a knife in your stocking, darling. The virtuous Mrs. Street might have got to know something about murder firsthand.
How dare she say I tried to poison Grandam?
Well, darling, somebody did. And the wretched Mildred is quite right. From the motive point of view, you're well in the picture, aren't you?
Do the police think that?
Oh, they keep their thoughts to themselves. But don't underestimate them, Gina. They're not fools.
I sat watching the sun setting slowly beyond the lake, and then went back into the great hall. Alex was standing by the fireplace, with his hand flung out in a somewhat flamboyant gesture.
Ah, do come in, Miss Marple. I'm just going over in my mind the events of last night.
Are you trying to reconstruct the crime?
No, not exactly. I was looking at the whole thing from an entirely different point of view. I was thinking of this place in terms of the theatre, as a sort of stage set. Not my own idea, the inspector gave it to me.
Inspector Curry?
I was trying to convince him about why I was so late getting to the hall, watching the effect of my headlamps on the fog and thinking of it as a theatre effect. He said a stage set was real in itself. It was made of canvas and wood, but the illusion was in the eye of the beholder.
What a very penetrating remark.
Isn't it? Unfortunately, I didn't appreciate it much at the time, since he was doing his best to scare the hell out of me by demonstrating how little time it took to get from the spot where I had stopped the car to the side door of Stonygates and back.
And how long did it take?
2 minutes and 42 seconds. Mind you, the poor constable who tried it was puffing like a steam engine by the time he got back. But I'd better be off. I want to do some work in the theatre, provided I can get one of the kids to give me a hand. Au revoir, Miss Marple.
Au revoir. What a very curious idea of the inspector's. That illusion is in the eye of the beholder. What is the phrase about conjurers? They do it with mirrors. That's it. They do it with mirrors. And what else did Mr. Esterick say? Oh, what was it? Something about the constable being out of breath.
Wally? Wally, what on earth are you doing here? I thought you'd rather drop dead than be seen anywhere near the theatre.
I was looking for you as it happens, Gina. Can we go outside for a minute? I want to talk to you, away from all the others.
What is it, Wally? You're looking terribly serious.
How long do you think it will be before this murder business is cleared up?
Well, the inquest's tomorrow. It'll be adjourned for a fortnight or something like that. At least that's what Inspector Curry gave us to understand.
A fortnight, say 3 weeks perhaps. And after that, we're free.
Free?
I'm going back to the States.
But I just can't drop everything like that. I couldn't leave Grandam, not while everything's so uncertain. And there are 2 new productions I'm working on in the theatre.
I didn't say we, Gina. I said I was going.
Do you mean you don't want me to go with you?
No, I didn't say that.
You don't care whether I come or not, is that it?
It's no good kidding ourselves, Gina. Our marriage is in trouble. It has been ever since we came to this place. I just don't belong here, and your family have made no secret of the fact that they don't think much of me.
That's not fair. Lewis has tried time and time again to get you interested in the work he's doing here.
Look, Gina, I'm simply not cut out to be a teacher or a psychiatrist. I'm a simple guy. I work with my hands, and all I want is to live in my own country, doing the kind of job I know how to do.
Like running a garage.
And what's wrong with that? But if that isn't the kind of life you want, then maybe you'd better cut free of me, so that you can start again. If you'd rather be with Steve or Alex, it's your choice, but I'm going home.
You do realise that you're top suspect for Uncle Christian's murder?
They'll need some evidence first.
I'm frightened for you, Wally. I've been frightened all along. I don't like the way that inspector looks at you. Like a cat waiting to pounce on a mouse.
I went out into the night and stood at the place where the inspector had made his experiment over how long it might have taken Alex Restorick to get to the house from his car. I felt that at last I was drawing close to the way in which the murder had been worked.
You'll get a chill, Miss Marple, standing about in this cold wind.
I was thinking about conjuring tricks. So difficult when you're watching them to see how they're done, and yet so absurdly simple when they're explained to you. Did you ever see the lady sawn in half? Such a thrilling trick, and I could never work out how they did it. But the other day there was an article in a newspaper giving the whole thing away. I don't really think journalists should be allowed to do that, do you? Apparently, it's not one girl, but 2. The head of one and the feet of the other. And the other way round would work equally well, wouldn't it?
Are you sure you're feeling all right, Miss Marple? Let's go in, shall we?
It's all a matter of making up your mind which is reality and which is illusion.
Is that Edgar Lawson going up to the house?
Yes, I think so. Of course. How stupid of me.
What is it?
I have remembered now who he reminds me of. A young man in St. Mary Mead called Leonard Wiley. His father was a dentist, but he got old and short-sighted, and so people started to go to his son. But the old man was very miserable, and said he was no good for anything anymore, and so Leonard, who was very soft-hearted and rather foolish, began to pretend to drink more than he should. He always smelled of whiskey, and he used to be rather fuddled when his patients came in. His idea was they'd go back to his father again.
And did they?
Oh, of course not. They went to Mr. Riley in the next village. Poor Leonard. Everyone could see he was play-acting. He overdid everything.
Miss Marple, I really must insist that we go in. It's biting cold, and forgive me, you're not quite talking sense. I can't make head nor tail of what you're going on about.
Jolly, I've been looking for you everywhere.
Miss Marple and I have been out on the terrace. Is something the matter, Mr. Sericold?
Annie Gregg was missing from roll call tonight.
Do you think he's run away?
Well, we don't know. They're searching everywhere for him.
He's been going round telling everybody he knows something about the murder of Uncle Christian.
Oh, Gina, that's nonsense, of course.
I only hope that someone hasn't taken him too seriously.
The poor foolish boy.
What's up?
Why are you all standing around with such long faces?
Ernie Gregg's gone missing.
Missing? Well, when last I saw him, he was going to help Alex in the theatre.
When was this, Stephen?
Well, it was over an hour ago.
They found them. It's horrible. Horrible.
What do you mean, found them?
Ernie Gregg and Alex Restorick. Their heads were crushed in.
Oh.
They were working on the stage. The big counterweight must have fallen down on them from the flies. They were killed instantly.
I've brought you a bowl of strong soup, Carrie Louise. Please drink it.
Oh, thank you, Jane. First Christian and now Alex. And poor silly little Ernie. Do you think the boy really knew anything?
I doubt it. He was just telling lies to make himself look important.
And so he was killed. And what about Alex? Was that pure accident, do you think? Because he was standing next to Ernie?
No, I don't think so. I was talking to him earlier this afternoon in the Great Hall. He'd been making an attempt to reconstruct the crime.
Alex was always very perceptive. He saw things others did not see.
And I suspect the murderer observed what he was doing and feared he was getting much too close to the truth, which he was.
How much do you know, Jane?
I can't be quite sure.
I think you are sure.
Yes, I believe I am. What do you want me to do?
It's in your hands, Jane. You will do whatever you think is right.
Yes, Miss Marple, what is it?
I need to talk to you. Could we go into the Great Hall?
As you wish, but surely we could talk more privately in here.
It is not privacy we need, Inspector. I want to show you something that Alex Restorick made me see.
Very well. What exactly did he show you, Miss Marple?
Well, he didn't show me anything, not directly. It's all a question of conjuring tricks, you see, of directing the attention of the audience the wrong way. They do it with mirrors, if you understand me.
I don't understand you at all. What exactly are you getting at?
Would you come and stand here, Inspector? I want you to think of this place as a stage set, as it was at the time Christian Gulbranson was killed. You are here, in the audience, looking at the people on the stage.
The audience?
Mrs. Saracold and myself, and Mildred Street and Gina and Stephen. And just as on the stage, there are entrances and exits, and the characters go out to different places. Only when you are in the audience, you don't realize where they are really going to.
You mean that they go out to the wings, to backstage?
Yes, exactly. Now, think of this as a play, and the scene is the Great Hall of Stony Gates, with the piano on the left and the fireplace centre stage, and the door to Mr. Saracold's study on the right.
Yes.
But what is backstage? What is behind all that?
The corridor with the dining room and Christian Gulbranson's room opening off it.
And beyond that?
The terrace.
The terrace. And a lot of windows opening onto it from the study and the dining room. And the side door by the room where Gulbranson was writing his letter. And you see, that is how the trick was done. It was the conjuring trick of the lady sawn in half that made me think of it.
The lady sawn in half?
Yes, only not one lady, but two. And then I thought it could also be the other way round. Two people could really be one person.
Two people, only one?
Oh, yes, but only for a short time. How long did your constable take to run from where Alex Restorick stopped his car in the drive to the house and back again?
2 minutes and 42 seconds.
But this was a much shorter distance. It could be done in well under 2 minutes.
What could be done?
The conjuring trick. Not two people, but one person, there in the study. Here in the auditorium, we're only looking at the visible part of it, the study door. But behind the scenes is the study window, which opens onto the terrace. So easy to open it, run along the terrace.
And Alex Restrick said he heard running footsteps.
And then go in by the side door, shoot Christian Gulbranson at his desk, and then run back. And all the time, the other person in the study does both of the voices, so that we're all quite certain that there are two people in there. And so there were, for the most part. But not for those crucial 2 minutes.
You mean that it was Edgar Lawson who ran along the terrace and shot Gulbranson? Edgar Lawson who was poisoning Mrs. Sericold?
Oh, no, Inspector. You see, no one has been poisoning Mrs. Sericold. That is where the misdirection comes in. Someone very cleverly made use of the fact that Mrs. Sericold's sufferings from arthritis were not unlike the symptoms of arsenic poisoning. It's the old conjurer's trick of forcing a card on you.
But Mrs. Sericold's medicine quite definitely contained arsenic.
And it is so easy to add arsenic to a bottle of tonic. So easy to add another paragraph to the typewritten letter to the Bishop of Cromer.
Quite childishly simple when you come to think of it.
You see, the real reason for Christian Gulbranson coming here was the most likely one. It was to do with the Gulbranson Trust. Money, in fact. I think you will find evidence of embezzlement. Embezzlement on a very large scale.
And that points to only one person.
Yes, Inspector. Louis Sericold.
Louis? I can't believe it.
But you see, Ruth, there really wasn't anyone else it could have been.
So what exactly happened?
It was all over very quickly. Edgar Lawson went to pieces the moment the inspector started to question him. Louis would probably have done his best to bluff it out, but the poor boy just lost his nerve and ran from the house. There was a policeman posted outside, so he couldn't get to the drive, and he headed straight for the lake. There was a full moon, so he could just about see what he was doing. A rotten old punt was moored to the landing stage, and he leapt onto it and pushed off. What he imagined he was going to do, I have no idea.
And where was Louis all this time?
He was following on with the inspector and the rest of us. He started shouting at Lawson.
Edgar! The boat isn't safe! Come back!
And just at that moment, the boat went down, and there was the poor boy struggling in the water.
But couldn't he swim?
Apparently not. And then Louis jumped in and swam after him. He got to him, but then they got hopelessly tangled up in the reeds.
They'll drown. They'll both of them drown.
Yes. They are going to drown.
And was that the end?
Yes. They didn't find the bodies until early this morning.
And Carrie Louise, how is she?
She looks very frail, but in some strange way she seems curiously untouched by it all.
I was planning to come down this evening. Do you think that would be all right?
Yes, Ruth, I know she would very much like to see you.
Just imagine the three of us together again, for the first time in more than a quarter of a century.
You see, Carrie Louise, I was really rather foolish.
Foolish, Jane? It seems to me that you've been quite remarkably perceptive.
Oh, no. I should never have doubted you from the beginning. But everyone kept on telling me that you didn't live in the real world.
I guess that includes me. I said you were an idealist who was a complete sucker for cranks.
But in fact, you were never deceived by illusion as the rest of us were. You just couldn't believe anyone could try to poison you. And you were right. You kept on assuring me that Edgar Lawson would never harm Louis when they were locked in the study together. And again, you were right.
But what made you see through the whole thing, Jane? How did you work it out?
It was Alex Restrick who made me look at everything from a different angle by showing me that the murder was based on a clever illusion. And then I saw what the trick was.
One person pretending to be two.
And when he was telling me that he had heard running feet from outside the house, I began to see how it could have been done. But it was the fact that the constable who made the experiment of running to the house and back was puffing and panting that gave me the real clue.
You mean that when Louis opened the door of the study to us, after Edgar had fired the pistol into the wall, He was out of breath.
Because he'd been running hard to get back into the study after he had shot Christian.
But it was Edgar Lawson who was really the pivot of it all. There was always something not quite right about him that I couldn't put my finger on. All the things he said and did were exactly right for what he was supposed to be, but he himself wasn't real, because he was actually a normal, if rather nervous young man, trying to play the part of a schizophrenic. And as soon as I realized that, everything fell into place.
But what had Louis done? Was it embezzlement? Oh, I'm sorry, Carrie Louise. I shouldn't have asked. It's far too soon.
Oh, no, Ruth. I want to talk about it. I rang up Dr. Galbraith this afternoon.
The Bishop of Cromer?
Yes. And it seems that he, too, had had his suspicions about what Louis was up to. And if Christian hadn't spoken out then, he would have done so.
So what had he discovered?
Louis had always had this dream of a kind of utopia. He believed that the reason why so many young people reoffended after their release was that they could not resist the pressures and temptations of the world around them. He wanted to take them away from all that, to found a self-supporting community on some remote island where they could begin a completely new life.
Rather like the convicts who were transported to Australia.
Yes, but to achieve this, he needed really colossal amounts of money. He believed, I think, that the end justified the means. And of course he had at his disposal all that he needed.
You mean some of the young criminals who had passed through here?
The bishop told me that Louis selected those boys who showed a pronounced criminal intelligence. They were specially trained and placed in key positions in banks and major financial concerns. I don't know exactly how it was done, but it seems that under various names and bank accounts and companies, Louis was in a position to dispose of very considerable amounts of money.
And Christian had found out about this.
Oh, yes. But he was greatly concerned about the effect that any possible prosecution of Louis would have upon me.
Which was why he wanted to know about your heart, and accidentally gave credence to the story about you being poisoned, which Louis had concocted to account for Christian's visit.
But surely he was taking one hell of a risk, persuading that boy to be his accomplice. Or did he have some kind of hold over this Edgar Lawson?
It wasn't exactly a hold. I presume you noticed the likeness, Jane.
I noticed it, but I couldn't quite believe it. You knew all along.
I guessed. I knew he'd had a brief infatuation for an actress before he met me. I've no doubt that Edgar was Louis's son.
And he gave his life trying to save him.
I'm glad it ended that way. People who can be very good can be very bad, too. I always knew that about Louis. But he loved me very much, and I loved him.
Did you ever suspect him?
Not until Alex and Ernie were killed. I didn't think that anyone else but Louis would have dared. And I began to be afraid of what he might do next. I always admired Louis for his goodness. But now I see that goodness isn't enough. You have to be humble as well.
That is what I have always admired about you, Carrie Louise. Your humility.
Oh, but I'm not particularly humble, Jane. Nor really very good. I can only admire goodness in other people.
Still the same blue-eyed idealist after all these years. Dear Carrie Louise.
So you have decided to go back to America with your husband.
I shall forget all about Stonygates and all my wild theatrical notions and become a 100% American housewife. If there's one thing I've learned from this whole ghastly experience, it's that Wally is a truly marvellous person.
I am sure that the two of you will be very happy. You quite put me in mind of a young...
Please don't say it, Miss Marple. I've heard too many of your parallels from St. Mary Mead. They've always got a sting in the tail. You really are a wicked old woman, you know.
Jane, we're going for a stroll down to the brook. Are you coming?
When I think of you and Aunt Ruth and Grandam all being girls together, just can't imagine it somehow.
No, I don't suppose you can. It was all such a long time ago, and yet it feels just like yesterday.
Coming.
In the final part of Agatha Christie's They Do It With Mirrors, Miss Marple was played by June Whitfield. Carrie Louise, Ursula Howells, Ruth Van Rydock, Jill Balkan, Louis Serracold, Peter Howell, Inspector Curry, Keith Barron. Mildred Street, Natasha Pine, Gina Hudd, Rebecca Lacey, Walter Hudd, Stephen Lucas, Alex Restorick, Nick Waring, Stephen Restorick, Daniel Philpott, Juliet Belliver, Paula Jacobs. They Do It With Mirrors was dramatized for radio by Michael Bakewell and directed by Enid Williams.